Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Wandler, Senior Director of Policy Initiatives for the Midwestern Higher Education Compact, or MEC. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I wanted to cover some housekeeping items. We're recording this conversation and we'll post the recording to our website after the presentation. We welcome questions. Please use the Q&A box and we will do our best to address all questions. Mary will post a link of the presentation in the chat. Upon closing out today's meeting, you'll have an opportunity to give us feedback. Please complete the survey to help us improve all our future convenings. So with that said, welcome to our Advancing Workforce Pell Strategies for State and System Implementation discussion today. Hopefully many of you were able to join our last webinar with Cheryl Dowd, Senior Director of Policy Innovations at WCET. She provided a timely overview of the state of Workforce Pell. It was a great discussion, and so we've asked her to come back and help us moderate this panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, who is going to moderate and introduce each of our participants today. Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Carrie. I'm honored to be invited back. I was honored to be invited to do the first session as well, where we addressed what the particular rules are related to Workforce Pell. And before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that the final regulations have not been released. We are working on what was developed in statute from last summer from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and then was put into a rulemaking where we have proposed rules that were offered for public comment. But as of about 15 minutes ago, I went and checked, and they are still subject to the Executive Order 12866 review, which is an executive office, executive branch review of final drafts before it goes back to the department to then be released as final. So we do not have final regulations on Workforce Pell yet, but we anticipate them this month. So our wonderful panel here is going to be addressing, what we know from the statute and then from the proposed regulations. Another thing to point out to you is that the National Governors Association met just last week in collaborating again, much like what we're doing. And I'm going to put that in the chat if you want to read an article about their convening last week where they were talking about Workforce Pell. I think you'll find it enlightening. So I will not drone on any further. I want to make sure that we introduce our wonderful panel. First in our panel is Lynette Kuhn. She's the Deputy Secretary for Postsecondary and Higher Education, and she's the Commissioner for Postsecondary and Higher Education for Pennsylvania Department of Education. Welcome, Lynette.
Thank you.
We have Cynthia Proctor, who is the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Credential Innovation from State University of New York SUNY system. Welcome, Cynthia.
Hello.
We have Amy Schaefer, who's the Senior Director of Legal Services and Program Implementation for the Ohio Department of Higher Education. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you.
And we have Leroy Wade, Deputy Commissioner, Operations, Missouri Department of Higher Education and Workforce Development. So welcome, Leroy.
Thank you.
So today we are going to take that next step. We talked about what the rules are and what the direction is, but now we're going to take a deeper dive into the implementation in practice. So we're going to hear from our panel who represent state systems as well as state agencies in the development of processes for program identification, approval processes, and cross-agency collaboration. So our panelists are going to discuss, pardon? Sorry, I thought I heard somebody. Panelists will discuss key challenges, lessons learned, and strategies for aligning stakeholders and advancing implementation under tight timelines. We know that these regulations, because they came from statute from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, directed that the regulations will be effective July 1, 2026. So we are under an interesting timeline. That doesn't mean that everything will be provided for student implementation immediately, but it is something that is causing everyone to move a little bit more swiftly to put processes in place. So we're going to first start with some information from our non-MEC panelists. We're fortunate to have two folks that are going to help us kind of tease out, what are the specifics that they are addressing within their state and system. And so we're going to start first with Lynette Kuhn. Lynette, if we could talk a little bit about, how things are moving in Pennsylvania, about where you, from a high level, what your agency is doing, where are you in the process, and the kinds of speed bumps, challenges that you're encountering while you put processes in place.
Sure. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are today. So it's really great to be here. Really pleased where Pennsylvania is in the process, but we took a little bit of a different approach where we worked hand in hand with our state workforce development board, but our Governor Shapiro, actually designated the Pennsylvania Department of Education as the lead agency to lead this effort. The reason for that is in Pennsylvania, the data collection would be coming mostly from the institutions. And being such a decentralized state, especially with our higher ed sectors, it made more sense to be able to have that data collection come through education and then to have education connect with our labor and industry to get the further variables and wage metrics that are required by the proposed rule. So through that, we developed our implementation process in collaboration with our State Workforce Development Board, and we launched our application for collection on March 9th. So we actually closed our data collection on April 17th, and next Tuesday, we'll be presenting our findings at our State Workforce Development Board meeting in order to have our proposed program list for the institutions approved and endorsed by the State Workforce Development Board. Learned a lot throughout the process. We really aligned closely to the proposed regulations, but are very honest with the institutions that applied that upon posting or publishing of the final rule, we will analyze that to make sure that if there was a certain interpretation or understanding that we had in the proposed rule, a word was changed, a clause was changed, that we would be able to go back and review our approval process to see if any more programs would qualify. So some of the challenges that we're facing in Pennsylvania is really the inclusion of apprenticeship programs, and we struggle with that for two reasons. One, the related technical instruction mostly does not align in apprenticeship programs with the proposed weeks and hour rules that are in place right now. So innovation will have to come into effect to make sure that we're aligning those programs to meet the requirements of Workforce Pell, and that could take some time to make sure that we're structuring it. There's also been some talk and, really looking forward to hearing from other states and just collaborating on moving the related technical instruction more to like the pre-apprenticeship portion before they step into the apprenticeship, because the question we have here in Pennsylvania is what credential is awarded after the related technical instruction. And then while we believe that apprenticeship does mean employment, is that going to be a qualifying placement if they're already in the apprenticeship? And will they actually still be employed 2 quarters after their completion date of the related technical instruction? Of course, it goes to the length of the apprenticeship program. The second challenge is really looking at the stackability requirement for the sole recognized credential. So I will use CDL as an example, and the way that we have interpreted the proposed regulations is that while a CDL is a sole recognized credential, you can't have any other credential to become a CDL driver besides a CDL license and taking the coursework related to that. What does stackability look like? And our interpretation was that the institution does need to demonstrate a pathway for initial approval on where a student who completed a CDL program would be able to advance to in their pathway for education, and what credits would be aligned to it. So really looking forward to hearing more about how other states are viewing the sole recognized credential, but that's Pennsylvania's interpretation of it as of now. And some insights that I'm excited to provide today is really just how a decentralized state, as I mentioned earlier, implemented Workforce Pell, and like us all, while we're still waiting for those final rules. So thank you for this opportunity, and I look forward to continuing the discussion with everybody.
Thank you very much, Lynette. And next, we're going to talk with Cynthia from SUNY, and I've had the pleasure of being a moderator on a panel that Cynthia was a panelist to share how things are working at the SUNY system, and it's they've done a marvelous job. And so I wondered if Cynthia, you wouldn't mind giving us a high level understanding of how you've developed your structure within your system.
Sure. Thanks so much, Cheryl. So at SUNY, we were excited about Workforce Pell for a number of reasons. We have a large micro-credential program at SUNY, and we also have a number of non-credit programs. For those of you who aren't familiar with SUNY, we are the largest comprehensive public system of higher education in the U.S., community colleges all the way through R1 research institutions, medical universities. And so we actually have a pretty sophisticated micro-credential program now that where the credits stack to everything from a certificate all the way up to the medical doctor. And then we're working on, because of some state legislation that we already have, pathways to the degree for some of our non-credit offerings. So we saw Workforce Pell as a potential opportunity for students to bundle federal aid with some newer state aid that we received around short-term credentials. So that was exciting for us. I think what we're really trying to do is maximize opportunities for students. And like so many things that we do at SUNY System, we're good planners. And so right from the very beginning, we set up a structure. So we have a sort of an executive team, and then we have three subgroups, one looking at programs and processes. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that group did so far. We have a data subgroup that's been in charge of sort of collecting proposed credentials from campuses and running some initial tabulations. And then we also have a marketing and recruitment subgroup because, you know, what we've seen already on the micro-credential side and with some of our non-credit work is that transparency to students is everything, right? We have to be able to explain to them what this is, what this isn't, how they apply, when they should be thinking about this, how they bundle aid. It is a challenging communications effort. So I'm glad that we have a dedicated group working on that. And right from the beginning, we reached out to all of our state partners. So it has been a strong collaborative effort. Can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So one of our primary challenges was to make sure that, you know, SUNY was represented, that we had a voice. And so we started talking to other agencies in the state, our Workforce Development Board. And, you know, first we were thinking about how do we define the industries. I'll tell you that initially right now we're looking at our state's WIOA plan and our Perkins V plan to define industries. Then we started defining process, you know, much like Lynette described, we have a document that looks at everything from who's going to approve these credentials on behalf of the governor. We're recommending a committee, how often they meet, what documentation they require. Lots of conversation with our Workforce Development Board and industry partners about how campuses will verify that the employer recommends the micro-credential as satisfying hiring needs and expected competencies, right? So we've developed a letter template. We've talked to chief academic officers about attesting that credentials are stackable and portable. Also ask them to think about revocation process. There are strict requirements about when a credential falls below the required outcomes in this program. And so What does the process look like for student notification, for teach out? We've also talked about how we monitor progress, right? How we work with a campus if we think that they're starting to head toward a decline. On data collection and reporting, there's so much work to do, but one point I just want to make is we're using this as an opportunity to address some ongoing data challenges we've had in this space. And so from that perspective, I'm very grateful for the program. And then, of course, we all have a number of unknowns as we wait for the final regulations. Thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So now we're going to move to some representation from the MEC region, and we're going to start with Leroy Wade. And Leroy, could you tell us a little bit about, how Missouri is managing the development of this structure for the institutions in your state?
Cheryl, certainly glad to, and welcome everyone. Glad to have this opportunity. Again, one of the things that is unique to Missouri is that we are a combined agency. We're the Department of Higher Ed and Workforce Development. And so we have an integrated process both on the higher education and the workforce side. The coordinating board, which is our higher ed agency, and the state workforce development board are a part of our agency. And so we operate the WIOA program. We write the WIOA plan each year. And we also include within our agency the labor market research unit. And so we provide the information for Perkins 5 in terms of high need, high wage kinds of programs. So it's given us a little bit of a different dynamic than some of the other states have experienced because we've got those pieces in. And so while the communication is a little different, it's a little smoother than it would be if we were working with different agencies and that. So that part has been somewhat of an advantage. In terms of where we are, again, we started out looking at the occupational side of things, and so went through a process to look at standard occupational codes, which ones meet the criteria that are set in the statute, and then built that out through the crosswalk into instructional programs. And so we've gotten that process complete at this point. We've also have a draft of our policies and procedures right now that's out for review. In fact, later today and tomorrow, the State Workforce Board will be going through those materials and looking at that as well. So, and again, we'll be bringing information to the coordinating board at their regular meeting. And I think, again, we're a little behind Pennsylvania, but we're projecting right now that we think the program application will be available by June 1. We've struggled a little bit. Our legislative session ends this week. Last week was the budget part of that process. And so getting some of the folks' attention, particularly in the governor's office, to look at some of this stuff and meet with us has been a challenge because they're really focused on the end of session and are they going to get their legislative priorities passed. But we have built a really good relationship with the governor in working through this. So if you could go on to the next slide. Again, in terms of challenges, again, as I think a number of states are facing, we just need more robust data, particularly about the non-credit programs, but we've got some gaps in other areas as well. And so we've been talking about how do we address some of that. Some of that will involve, or at least potentially would involve working with our unemployment area. It's called the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations in Missouri. Because we need to expand some of the data that they collect through their process. And they've been, at least in the past, have been reluctant to do that. So we need to continue to work with them and internally to kind of build out our data collection process in that regard and the data that we have about these programs. We're also, trying to figure out the best way to incorporate the required technical instruction from apprenticeships into this process. One of the challenges there is, and I apologize, I've turned purple. I don't know what that's about, but it's not subject to the occupational instruction program list. They automatically meet all those high demand, high wage requirements with that. So it's at this point, we don't really know how many of those will show up or what they might look like. And then as someone talked about, again, many times the technical instruction is not in a consecutive process. They may get a little today, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, they get another chunk of that. And so how does that build into this process and how does it go about meeting some of the same requirements that the more standard education programs do. And then again, as everybody has said, trying to work through this in the absence of a final rule, doing the best we can with it, but realizing that there may still be some changes that are taking place. In terms of insights, folks have mentioned this again, broad communication, even though we have a number of pieces internal to us, making sure that the institutions and the employers and the industry partners are involved in this process and know where we are and know kind of what our targets are has been an important part of that. And then I would say managing expectations. I think initially what we saw, particularly from some of our institutional partners, oh man, this is going to be the greatest thing ever. There's going to be hundreds of programs and money's just going to come rolling in. And I don't think that's maybe ever going to be the case, but it's certainly not the case in this initial year. And so trying to kind of tamp down some of that and really the language that we've been using is let's do what we can in this initial year. And then we'll build this out as we go forward, as we learn more, as final rules become available, as we kind of get our feet on the ground around this. And so that's really been the kinds of things that we've been working with. So.
Thank you very much, Leroy. And I am curious, how did you turn purple?
I don't know. I'll see what I can do about changing it back.
Oh my goodness, that's so funny. Tech is great, right? So thank you very much, Leroy. And we also want to hear from Amy. Amy, could you share a bit about, what your role is? What are some of the Ohio priorities and challenges, as well as the strategies that your state is planning to implement?
Thank you so much for having me. And we've had a lot of good information already, and I would echo a lot of what my fellow panelists have said. I'm always excited and happy to be around anyone who wants to get in the weeds with me on Workforce Pell. And excited to share what Ohio has done so far. I can announce that our application actually went live at 11 a.m. today, Eastern Time. So I'm feeling pretty celebratory about that. And I know it's not a finish line, but it feels like a mini finish line of sorts and a good place to be at the middle of March or May. ODHE was tapped by the governor to take the lead on Workforce Pell, and he also directed the Department of Job and Family Services, our workforce agency, to assist us as needed. But we've really been the lead role on this since the fall. And the constant direction that I was given by our leadership was just to take a really pragmatic, practical approach. We feel like the federal law and regulation is onerous enough, and it puts a lot on our institutions. So we want to make sure that we are making it as simple to follow and just educating people as much as possible so that they can be successful. My role has really consisted in understanding the laws and regulations. I am an attorney. I do a lot of program implementation within the agency as well, which is reflected in my title. So Cheryl, I know in part one, you had mentioned how important it was to really read the laws, read the regulations, and understand them. And that has certainly helped me a lot because there has really been so much misinformation out there. I'm sure you all have noticed it as well. People will put things out and I'm like, well, that's not quite right. That's not what the preamble said. And it's really been helpful to just really dig into the law and regulation, at least the proposed regulations until they're final. So I think that's helped us a lot. I've been helping, get all of our policies drafted. That's included a lot of collaboration with the experts within our agency on things like workforce and data, academic affairs. So I've learned a lot and really enjoyed working with my colleagues on that. And then just thinking through all of the operational details. How is this data going to be submitted? What format are we going to use for the application? We're using Qualtrics if anyone's interested. And just supporting our institutions. So I thought I would just share some perspectives of what I've learned so far. The first thing that has really crystallized to me is just the importance of building on the work that's already been done in your state. You know your state, and there isn't a need to always reinvent the wheel. I know when I first started attending meetings like this, I would hear people having these in-depth conversations like around the definition of high skill, high wage, and in demand. And sometimes I would feel a little like I'm not really confident in our decision on that. But as I learned more and as I talked to people and thought about it, Ohio already had a really good definition for that. And we feel like we do. It's a list that we've been using since 2018. The methodology factors in the high skill, high wage, and demand, critical jobs as well. So we didn't need to reinvent the wheel on that, and just finding that confidence that you know your state and you know your strengths and weaknesses has helped a lot. Again, we prioritized immediate implementation, and as opposed to like a lot of policy discussions, because our governor always says we want all of Ohio to reach their God-given potential, and we want these funds to get out to people as soon as possible because we know they're going to be really important. The funds could be really important to some people, so we want to make sure we're not a hindrance in any way to those funds flowing to our institutions. And finally, I would just say I think communication with stakeholders has helped us a lot be successful. We've worked really closely with the Ohio State Association of Community Colleges and our Ohio Technical Centers. I would be in conversations and people would say, talk about the work Ohio was doing, or Ohio's doing such a great job. And I was like, how do they know? Like, they haven't talked to me. And it sort of came about that we were communicating well and we were providing resources to people and being open and welcoming to questions. So I think that that's helped create some positive vibes around Workforce Pell in Ohio. Even though, as Leroy said, we know it's not going to fix everything, but it's a good step forward and we're excited to see where it goes.
Thank you very much, Amy. It is really impressive to hear the amount of work and development that each of the state and the system have done in preparation for the implementation of Workforce Pell. So thank you very much for sharing your area's specific development at this point. So we're going to move into a panel discussion. So we'll have some questions, and I hope our panelists will feel free to respond to the question. And then if anyone has a follow-up to whoever the first responder was, we'd be very happy to hear your follow-up comments in regard to any of the questions. So the first question is, what implementation decisions are most urgent right now? Is anybody willing to address that? Sure, Lynette.
When we started talking, that was the exact question that we asked, like where to start and what is the best way to start that conversation. And I think, Amy, Leroy, and Cynthia, you all kind of mentioned it, was what are those in-demand occupations? What are the programs? And for those that haven't connected or in the middle of the conversation with your state workforce development agency or boards, you really need to look at definitions of what that means. And when education says the word program, it means one thing. And when workforce says the word program, it means something else. And you need to learn a shared vocabulary between the two agencies because it's very different. As we went through that, then Pennsylvania went from a list of 800 universal occupations and drilled it down to 19 in-demand, high-skill, high-wage occupations that we were willing to look at education programming for this first cycle. And one of the misconceptions in Pennsylvania, at least, was that we were going to have 400 plus occupations because there's so many in demand. However, that's not reality. It's not going to be feasible for institutions to submit data on all of these programs that might align to the occupations. And also having the conversation with your workforce colleagues that not all programs are going to align to occupations that are in demand. And I'll just use electricians as an example. Most programs already qualify for traditional Pell. They don't fall within the weeks of Workforce Pell. So even though an electrician is an in-demand occupation in Pennsylvania, it did make it on our occupation list. We did not receive one application for an electrician program because it does not meet the eligible criteria posted in Workforce Pell. And really having that true, transparent conversation with your workforce colleagues is really important to have that collaboration and success of the program while you execute.
Thank you, Lynette. Does anybody else have any points from your area that you think are the most urgent right now? So Lynette, it sounds like it's identification of the programs. What are some other urgent points? Yes, Cynthia.
So we've been debating about the application and when we launched. So it was really interesting to hear my colleagues. Thank you for that. Maybe you'll give me a little bit more courage to move that forward. I keep hoping those final regulations are going to drop any second now. But so that's sort of a time sensitive decision for us. But really, I think just getting campuses to wrap their arms around the kinds of programs and the kinds of data collection and what from a system level, what kind of guidance requirements we want to put out around data collection has been interesting, right? We have an ongoing process on the side that's been looking at better collection on non-credit generally, right? And so now we're putting this sort of in the mix, like, oh, well, before that's done, we need to collect non-credit data for this project. And so that's another sort of policy decision that we really need to move quickly with.
Great. Thank you for that perspective, Cynthia. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
Would just
Sure.
mirror that, data was sort of our last decision that we had to make before our application went live. I had actually emailed Lynette a few weeks ago, like, how did you decide what data to ask for? And we borrowed Pennsylvania student level data, borrowed some things from the tracking sheet. So I certainly appreciate all the work everyone has done, but I think that seems to be a common sticking point for a lot of states. And I know with all of the different types of Title IV eligible providers, it's like we had some aspect of some of the data for credit, for not credit, for proprietary, for OTC. So it's certainly been a big challenge for us is the data, but we think we have something figured out to start, but ongoing, we know it's something we need to work on.
Great. Thank you very much. So moving on to a next thought is, piggybacking on what Lynette was saying about, having to approach identification and approval of eligible short-term programs in the other states or actually within your system, Cynthia, as you're trying to work with your institutions about what might be eligible in New York. What are you doing to help identify, what kind of programs can be eligible short-term programs?
We did a survey and we did it early on, and we laid out in a good old-fashioned spreadsheet. Here's the category, here are the questions we need you to think about. Tell us what you think is eligible now. Tell us what you think is close with a little adjustment, right? We have a number of micro credentials, for example, that are delivered in one semester, 15 weeks. Well, so, okay, we could probably pretty easily move that to a 14-week delivery without any substantial changes, right? So we wanted to get everything on the list. So what initially came in were hundreds of credentials, possible. And then as we started to really sort of narrow and decide what we were going to use for our industry lists, right? Looking at the WIOA plan, then we sort of said, okay, guys, we need to cull this list down to what's matching the industries, right? And then we did some data testing. Okay, well, do you really have the data that we need for these credentials? And some of that work is still going on now. We found we had to pull data from lots of different sources and give campuses ways to submit some data to us that they hadn't submitted to system before, but that they had on hand around non-credit. And so trying to figure out how to accommodate that in ways that are manageable, scalable, replicable, is part of the work underway now.
Great, thank you. I am curious, how perhaps Ohio or Missouri is making a determination about what the programs will be. What is your threshold?
I can go ahead and jump in again.
Great.
As Cynthia just said, again, we did something similar in terms of reaching out. We focused more on the community colleges, assuming they would probably be one of the primary providers, and so we're able to pull together a list of these are the programs that we think are likely to meet that, and that's helped us on both sides. One, it's helped us kind of decide are we in the right lane here? Are we setting this broad enough, but yet with enough guardrails around it that it doesn't become overwhelming. And it also sent a message, I think, back to the institutions. We're getting constant questions about, well, what's going to fit? How is it going to work? And much of that is still in process. And so, as I said, we came from an occupational perspective on this. That's how we set our primary list, and then built that out. One of the decisions we had to make was in many instances, it's a one-to-one relationship. A SOC code leads directly to a SIP code. Those are simple, but there are a lot of others where it's a one-to-many kind of relationship. And in some instances, there may be, you may have 6 SIP codes, but 1 or 2 of those may not have, may have only one program in, or there may not be very many people in it. But the decision we made was to go ahead and cast the net wide at this point and say, if there's a crosswalk here to that SIP and fits it, we're going to go ahead and go down that road. I think that's been one of the processes that we've tried to go through, is to try and be sure it's this tension between, how do we move this toward its potential without it becoming overwhelming in terms of that process. And the same thing's true with the data collection side of things. Again, we've got a process. We're in place. We don't have quite the application ready yet, but again, there's going to be for our institutions a pretty good lift, I think, because this is not data in some sense that we've collected in the past. So again, it's still a work in process, I would say.
Great. So I'm curious, something that we continue to read about is the non-credit side. And so, at a lot of institutions, the credit side doesn't always communicate with the non-credit side. Are you finding any conflict or confusion in trying to embrace, what could be the credit side versus the non-credit side, or somehow to be able to, I think we talked about definitions need to be addressed, but, trying to get everyone on board?
Right, and again, that's an issue that we've struggled with, I think, and we've had some questions around that. I think in many instances, that's going to be an institutional issue that they're going to have to deal with. But yes, we've definitely seen that one of the advantages we've had, and I know other states have this, we've got a workforce-related financial aid program already, and it includes non-credit types of programs would be eligible for that. And so, at least for some institutions, they've had to work through this issue of, well, does the financial aid office know what's going on, and compared to the other part of the institution? And so I'm not suggesting that's going to solve all of our problems in that realm, but I'm hopeful at least that it's smoothed the road just a little bit at least.
Mm-hmm.
I can say, as we have been looking at the data that we've received from the programs, that is one of the absent areas that institutions have not been able to provide. So if they have had, a 150-hour CDL program, there is no credit articulation then to what the stackability or the portability would be for that. And that's the challenge. But I do reference Ohio a lot, where their office has looked at those credentials, the non-credit, and have worked with faculty to assign credit, and Pennsylvania will be taking that same approach. And I thought that was really smart, because you're looking at it from a state perspective, but with faculty and institutional advice, so that it could be scaled across institutions. But I think we've missed in higher ed a lot of times how these certificate and diploma non-credit programs can actually articulate to a degree-bearing credential. And this program is going to innovate those conversations, but want to credit Ohio's work in that, because I think it's amazing.
It's great. Any other thoughts?
I'll just add to that. We've done two things. I agree with you, Cheryl, that it is a challenge around the non-credit side. We do benefit from the fact that, as Leroy mentioned, we have a state tuition assistance program that supports credit and non-credit credentials, provided that they stack to a degree. And so we've had some campuses already thinking about that. So that gave us some good language to work on. As a university system, about 2 years ago, we completely revamped our award of academic credit by evaluation process. So all of the campuses have plans for that, and they've been actively working to assess their own non-credit activity as part of that. So that's great. And I'll also say that there is a little bit of a disconnect on the credit bearing side too, in terms of thinking about the link between credentials and jobs. And one of the things that we did when we launched our new micro-credential website was I said, every one of our micro-credentials is going to have the description. Our micro-credential pages will have a description that starts, successful completion of this micro-credential allows you to, right? And you would be surprised, the first sort of round of these coming back were like, allows you to live a happy life, right? Not a lot of specifics. And so we really worked together to say, okay, no, let's look at this, right? It allows you to continue your education because it's stackable to a degree, but does it allow you to apply for jobs? And if so, what are those job titles? And does it allow you to seek a promotion? Does it add certain specialized skills that are in demand? And so that's a process we're continuing to evolve. I just this week, and with some new credentials submitted, I was like, oh, these are great descriptions. They really nailed my sentence. But so I think there's work needed on both sides, but I think that too is bringing the academic and the workforce side of the house together.
I remember during rulemaking, there were several webinars about, review of what had happened. And I believe that there are a number of institutions that are really trying to work a melding of the non-credit and the credit side. So I think we're going to start, this is going to be a great bridge, to see that moving forward. So thank you very much for that, Cynthia. So here is an interesting question. What tensions are emerging between speed, quality, and accountability as we start to move forward with this? I know there's enormous pressure on some states and in some institutions, to be the first. The department likes to talk about which program is going to be, the first one that's going to be approved, which just heightens everything. But I'm really curious your point of view about, how speed and quality are a part of this. Lynette?
I can say in Pennsylvania, we put quality first and really looked at what the outcomes of the program need to be. And when we did our interest survey back in December to our institutions, we were able to kind of flesh out some of the metrics that we would have connected. And I can say a lot of the tension that we received back from the institutions was, well, we don't collect that. How can you ask us that? Or, for example, social security numbers. We need that to connect to wage data. And so while it's a tension for the accountability piece, it allowed us to actually produce policy in, I don't mean record time, but for a state agency, I feel like it was record time because we were able to align with the requirements of the proposed rule and then also have a justification of why we were asking these. And there wasn't a lot of room for interpretation. So like we were given these, this is what's required. It's a voluntary program. You meet it or you don't. And if not, now we're going to look at ways to innovate. So as a starting point, I think that tension between the institutions and the data collection is, well, we didn't know this was coming. How can you ask for this information? And then explaining that justification back of why that information is required.
Thank you very much, Lynette. Anybody else have some thoughts on that?
Well, again, I'll jump in again. I think, as Lynette said, I think, although we're trying our best to make this as speedy as we can and hit the deadlines. I think quality is what we've tried to look at as well. I think we had a lot of conversation around the risks of let's approve a lot of programs and then we end up some of them either not making it through the process at the federal level or getting started and then finding out, well, wait a minute, they don't meet the requirements, and at least potentially putting institutions in a situation where they'll have to pay that money back, which is a part of the process. So we've really tried to focus on that side and keep this as narrow as we can within reason, but really focus on being sure that the programs that make it through the process are ones that we're reasonably confident are going to be successful in terms of this first pass through.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just add to that. I do urge everyone to put quality first because, there are significant repercussions if we put up a credential that, in a year's time fails to meet the required outcomes. And, institutions are looking at sort of a 2-year ban from being able to put up another credential in that same industry area. And so, we're really sort of setting our bar higher than the 70% so that, if there is some natural, deviation due to whatever the enrollment class happens to be, that we're going to still be okay. And so you've got to start with credentials that are going to meet that bar.
It's a very good point. Thank you, Cynthia. So we actually have had some questions already put in the Q&A, and so I'm going to lean to that a little bit. The first one's for Amy. Amy, does Ohio have a potential date when students will know which programs will qualify for Workforce Pell?
To answer this one live because I think it brings up such a big unknown, at least for me. And if any of my fellow panelists have an answer, I would love to hear it. But, we're going to work really hard to be able to certify as soon as possible. And, that's going to obviously we'll need some institutions to apply, which we don't know exactly when or if that will happen quickly. But I'm just so unclear of how long the federal process is going to take when they sort of, when we sort of hand the baton off to them and say that we think that this program qualifies. I'm very interested to learn more and not sure when that information will come out, if we're anticipating that with the final regulations, but I know they're working on a process as well. So I just wanted to be clear that everyone understood there's still this massive unknown in Workforce Pell.
That's a good point. Great, thank you, Amy. And then for any of you all, did any of you narrow your eligibility list to key industries?
We didn't start that way in Pennsylvania. We looked at the universal list, but just by organically going through what was in demand, how many jobs were going to be open over the next so many years, it led to healthcare industries, technology industries, and kind of those construction and trade. So it just organically ended up breaking down into those.
Did Ohio come down to any specific key industries?
We did not. We used the entire top jobs list and did our SOC to SIP crosswalk. Our SIP list is very extensive, and that's something we've discussed because there's a lot on there that connect to things that could never be a short-term credential. But just in discussions with our data team and some experts in our area, we were just really hesitant to start taking things off the SIP list because, again, we feel like there are still so many other requirements they're going to meet. So I think Ohio's SIP list is more expansive than a lot of what I've seen from other states, but we understand that and we feel comfortable and confident in that decision.
Great, thank you. So I know we have a number of institutions that are our participants today. So I want to help them for direction. So my last question is, where do institutions need the most guidance or support? Your thoughts?
I say
Anyone can jump.
with the data collection, we received a lot of questions of like, where do we get this information from? And if we only have social security numbers for half of the group, can we submit? So I think for institutions that want to submit, I highly recommend looking at the checklists that are provided or what the templates look like for the data collection. And if you don't currently collect those, that you start putting those in place so that you are able to submit for future years. But the data collection has been the hardest. Also connecting to the wage indicators in your UI systems in the state is also could be a challenge. It was in Pennsylvania. We were able to figure it out, but you kind of need those permissions and just gain the trust from your institutions in your state to be able to safe house and have the security measures in place to protect this information. But data collection has been very challenging. And it's not just the quantitative data. It is has your accreditor approved the program? Are you able to show that your accreditor looks at this non-credit program as part of your scope? What are you actually eligible for on your e-car, your PPA agreement with the feds, and understanding what you need to do next. Even if you get state approval, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be eligible for federal approval. And some don't know the accreditation question. And we spoke about this at NASAPS with the accreditor panel of what can our formerly regional accreditors provide to show the non-credit when our formerly known as national accreditors, do you look at those outcomes? So I do see our trade institutions being set up more successfully to submit this data and have access to what they're looking for Workforce Pell.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lynette. Any other thoughts?
Well, I'll jump in here again. It's kind of a mixed student institutional issue, but I've been thinking about this a lot because Workforce Pell is functionally different than regular Pell. Regular Pell, if my English program is eligible at institution X, it's going to be eligible at institution Y. That's not the case with Workforce Pell. We may say that CDL is a those are eligible programs, but my CDL program at one institution may meet the requirement and another one isn't. So I think communication with students, both from the department, but also from the institutions about that kind of a nuance that, well, I see this on the list, but it's not at this institution, is going to be an important part to kind of help students and families get through this process and understand, exactly how it works.
I think that's such a good point, Leroy. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about, based on my experience with our state part-time TAP for non-degree programs effort, is I'm not sure that we've thought enough about supporting our financial aid offices on campuses. Over the years, we've been able to sort of automate processes for the traditional award of financial aid. It's sort of in our student information system, the campus attests that, this person is eligible, et cetera, et cetera. It goes down the line. The student gets a standard, financial aid award letter. Now we're asking a whole new group of folks to fill out the FAFSA. They're going to get, because the FAFSA doesn't ask you if you're taking a credential or a degree, they're going to get an estimated award notification that could be very high because the system anticipates that they're registering for a degree. The local institution is going to have to say, oops, hey, wait a minute, we're reviewing you for this program, right? These are the parameters. And what's important for me is that letter also says, and if you want to continue on to the degree, we're going to reevaluate your financial aid award package so that students understand that they have this pathway, right? That communication process, automating what's happening, it's falling on the hands of financial aid directors who are already beyond maxed out in terms of what they have to do. They're dealing with all of the student loan changes, et cetera. So to me, I think the more that we can do to pay attention to, support, develop processes to make that process smooth and transparent to our students is at the top of my list.
That was a very good point, Cynthia. Thank you very much. Amy, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, I'll just close. I mean, I think in general, this is probably taking a bit of a step back, but there is still so much misunderstanding of what Workforce Pell even is and all of those little requirements that those of us on this call have memorized. So, I just, anytime I get in front of anyone, I just start back at the basics because oftentimes it's not what they thought. But I know in Ohio, another one of our guiding philosophies has just been to be a resource and a support to institutions. So I think, Lynette, I assume we will have some issues with data collection, and we're creating as many educational materials as we can to assist that up front and FAQs and all that stuff. But I think for us, it's just being proactive and really being approachable. And we all want the same thing again, which is for these learners to be successful and for our states to have good workforce Pell programs. So the extent that the state can be a resource is going to help move that along.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Well, it's been such a pleasure to speak with these panelists today. Thank you so much for your wisdom. It's been very helpful, and I'm sure our participants today got a lot out of it. I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie now.
Yes, thank you so much for those insights. I thought that I had this nailed down, and I found myself taking notes and thinking about things in a different way, especially about that financial aid director, right? That COM flow, I think, is something that isn't front of mind for people who don't live it. And so, yeah, I do appreciate that that comment as well. But thank you all for joining us today. Obviously, we appreciate you, Cheryl, for leading this esteemed panel. Happy to have you back anytime. I am so glad that you agreed to do this with us. Thank you also to Lynette and Cynthia, Leroy and Amy as well. So a reminder, please complete our survey. The survey will be available when you open up to exit the webinar, and the link will also be placed in the chat. We've already posted the presentation to the website, but we'll be posting the recording soon after. And you're welcome to keep informed with Mac by subscribing on our website as well for further discussion around Workforce Pell and other exciting topics. So thank you again for the joy of having this conversation, and we look forward to hosting another one soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks again.